Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Welcome and good morning, everyone. We're very pleased to host Mika Pagani, who is a vegetable entomology PhD student down at Virginia Tech. Thank you so much for joining us, Mika. We're excited for your presentation.
Absolutely. The pleasure is absolutely all mine. Again, hi everyone. My name is Mika Pagani. I'm a PhD candidate at Virginia Tech, and I'm so excited to be here today because, of course, being a researcher and a doctoral student, you think all I do is stay in a lab or on my farm and just do my research time and time. So it's really a great privilege when I have opportunities to do exciting, hopefully answer some questions at the end of this. So it feels like I'm doing a little bit more than just writing for the future. So again, I appreciate it. I'll do a quick little introduction about who I am exactly. I mentioned I'm a doctoral student in the Department of Entomology at Virginia Tech, and specifically that's in a lab called the Vegetable Insect Pest Research Lab under Dr. Thomas Kuhar. If you know him, he's also a big extension agent as well as a professor at Virginia Tech, so he really does juggle both, which inspires me, so which is why I'm here today, so I'm really happy. Just a quick little anecdotal fact, I'm actually from Fairfax County, so I'm in like your neighboring county right over. So this, again, really is a treat to speak to you all gardeners out there and just learners that are long learners. So I really do appreciate it. And if I could do a challenge on myself about doing my dissertation in a nutshell, which in the, I guess, academic world of doctoral students, it's kind of hefty to condense your 4 years of science into maybe one little 30-second clip, which is why I'm going to try and compete against myself if this video shows up. Hopefully someone can let me know if not. But I have a video of myself plating because a lot of my work, if you saw in that picture before, I had two pictures of myself. I was out on the farm being an agriculture entomologist, again, in vegetable insect pest research. I find myself on a farm, which is a great privilege because I guess my office is outdoors. But then half of the other work that I do, because I work in biological control systems, specifically with fungus, a lot of that is preparing the fungus, which means I have to be in a lab, in my lab coat with my fancy lab gloves. So I get to see the best of both worlds, which is kind of nice. So again, just to put my research in a nutshell for you all, just to get you acquainted with who I am and where I come from and why exactly I'm here. I work on a pest called the wireworm. Wireworms are the larval stage of click beetles. And again, let me try and see if this video works. If not, that's fine. No worries. It's all good. So again, the click beetle is in this left picture over here, that big adult. They're known for having this very unique thoracic segment that they can click, and it makes an audible clicking sound, which is quite cool. So if you ever find one, again, this is summertime right now, and they come out and frequent around nighttime. So if you happen to just put like a porch light out at night, they probably frequent around that. So if you see those guys, they're very elongate, as you can see in this picture. But if they see you, or if they're threatened by you, or if they deem a threat around them, they have that cool thoracic segment, so they click it and they can just catapult into the air like meters away. So that's a skill that sometimes I'm like, that's pretty cool. If I was in a threatening situation or just a situation you don't want to be in any longer, have that secret superpower. So that's pretty exciting. Again, the adults, they frequent on flowers, they eat pollen and nectar. They're not really a nuisance to anyone. But the pest, that is why I do the work that I do. It is why I have the opportunity to speak to you all today. It's why I have funding and I have food in my belly. It is because the pest, that copper-colored kind of worm-looking thing, that is a wireworm, hence the name wire and worm. They are pests. They live in soil, so of any subterranean crop. So I'm sure you all are familiar if you are growing potatoes, radishes, carrots, anything that grows underground, including root systems. So if you have corn, those corn roots are so hefty and full of nutrients that these wireworms will definitely take advantage of them. And by take advantage, I mean eat them ferociously. They're ferocious eaters, they're generalists, they eat each other, they are found to be cannibalistic, they eat dirt when there's nothing around, so they're very resilient. And that's why I do the research I do, because once a farmer has them, or perhaps even a gardener, I'd be very interested to hear if any of you all have found these in your gardens. I will say it's probably not likely because they, again, burrow so far meters deep below the ground that they like big agricultural systems. But in case, just shoot me something in the chat, or we can speak about it after, because I'd love to hear. Because again, what I'm saying is once a farmer has them in that soil, it is very hard to get rid of them. They just take advantage. The adults will oviposit their eggs, lay their eggs in the soil, and they'll come back year in, year after. So they overwinter, they stay in that soil. There's not a lot of chemical controls to get rid of them, which is where I come in with my fungus. So I work on entomopathogenic fungi, big fancy word that we can break down that truly just means fungi that causes disease in insects. So that's what you kind of see here on that like right picture. It looks like a overstuffed teddy bear. That's that wireworm that's transformed after I applied fungus on it. So that's essentially what it looks like after the fungus goes through its like 2-week life cycle, given it was in the right environmental conditions, if everything was nice. As I'll tell you a little bit more about biological control because they're so sensitive to environmental conditions. But if everything worked out, that wireworm can be taken care of in a very sensitive environment, but also to low stress to the environment. It doesn't really hurt the environment. If you were to compare it to chemical controls, definitely doesn't leach into the water. It doesn't harm us, doesn't harm wildlife animals in there. So and not to be too much of a salesman about the work that I do, because again, they are sensitive to environmental controls, but just some fun facts about where I am. So again, that's what my dissertation's about. I find myself in the lab and on the farm. I do a lot of work with farmers, but that doesn't mean I can't work with gardeners too. And I have a garden myself. So I'm just really excited to be here, kind of bringing in my top hat as just an overall entomologist and someone that works in general entomology and has worked with a lot of garden systems. So I'm excited to speak about the importance of insects and just go over some pollinators, some beneficials, what are the good guys and what are the bad guys. So we'll get into that. But first, I will answer why insects? Why do I have the job I do? I kind of gave you a glimpse of working in agriculture and how important that is, considering you have farmers and that's how they feed their families and that's how they make their money. So if you have economic pests of importance, that's a really big deal. But just to even break it down further and go backwards, just to look at the sheer abundance of insects. I mean, if we're speaking about insects, we have to remember as humans not to be so egotistical sometimes, right? Because we really are, if you look at this graph, we really are living in an insect world. So the number of insect species, it's greater than half of all species on Earth. All animal species, which I find incredible. I don't know if that's just me nerding out right now. Maybe some of you are resonating with that. I mean, it's just, with more species of insects on Earth than any other group of organisms, you can't deny the work of entomologists. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it's just, they overpower us, right? So again, we really have to look at them and understand if there's so many of them, they have to be doing great things for us, right? So I kind of like to do this exercise really quickly where if we were to imagine the world without insects, what does that even look like? Because I'm sure all of their ecosystem services, the things that they shine through in agriculture, become very, very clear, right? So just again, as an example, I'll do like nutrient cycling first. So I have a little dung beetle in that corner picture there. And what that dung beetle signifies is just breaking down of organic matter. So that can include dung or frass, our fun word of the day, which is insect poop, if I may say. But also just breaking down decaying vegetation, decaying wood and forests, even carcasses, so animal waste that wouldn't otherwise be broken down, right? And thereby in that process, they also aid with the natural release of carbon dioxide. In soils, they improve aeration and texture and composition. So without them, we would be about knee deep in frass. Again, insect poop. That is our word of the day. So, I mean, I can even go on tangents, and please stop me, because I know I do that too much, because I love it. But there was a case study in like Australia, so maybe if someone's a little interested and we could talk about it after, or if you just want to take this knowledge base and use it to Google with later, please feel free, because I remember learning about this in my general entomology class years ago, and it just really stuck with me because it's so interesting to show the problem of if we did not have insects to recycle dung matter, right? So in Australia, there were cattle farmers, I believe, and I'll very much lightly paraphrase the story because I don't want to pretend I know it exact, and this is what my dissertation is on. But from my understanding, in Australia, they brought in non-native cows or cattle, and then they did not bring the native dung beetles that co-evolved with them to specifically recycle their specific dung. So they were like, oh, there's dung beetles in Australia, they'll be fine. And then they brought the cattle over, and then the dung beetles that were native to Australia were like, we don't like this poop. That's not the dung that we normally eat. That's way too wet, way too gross. That's not for us. And then after years, their agriculture systems were flooded with nitrogen. There was nothing to grow. As I'm sure all of you as gardeners know, if there's too much nitrogen in your soil, you cannot grow anything in it, not to mention just lots and lots of frass. So that was in their system, literally living knee deep in frass. That could be us if we don't, I guess, appreciate dung beetles. So that's my little word. Amongst just dung, there's also agriculture importance. So I have, I guess that B right there. I guess you'll think of pollination, but you can even break it down further into plant propagation. So propagation just meaning like spreading, promoting plant growth, because I know us commonly we think of agriculture pollination by bees and spreading pollen, right? But you can also spread fungal spores. You can disperse seeds. There's also like individual microscopic movement of plant matter that happens too. But I guess just to hit home with the agriculture importance, I can even throw out numbers because I know numbers are good in presentations, right? So I would say that in terms of pollination, 1/3 of all of the food in our grocery store comes from pollinated systems. So they were at one point pollinated by insects. And then as a whole, I can quote from my advisor, so my big head honcho at my lab, that the US pollination industry per year is $20 billion, and that's per year. So it's undeniably important, again, just in terms of our food. And then if you want to bring it back further, because that's what I'm doing today, even outside of our westernized cultures, right, insects as a food source themselves, incredibly important too. So just sustainable, high in protein and fat, something that we're somehow coming to find out too, because a lot of cultures outside the US do that. So not only for humans, but also wildlife, they eat them, bats and birds, very important food source. And again, if I'm going through that model of just a life without insects, I'm sure all of you are like, there's like at least one insect you hate, right? Like I know as an entomologist, we all kind of have answers like that too. We're probably thinking mosquitoes, which fair enough, very valid answer, because mosquitoes, again, fun facts for the days, because I just have them flooding through my head. They are the deadliest animal on the planet. That's in terms of human deaths per year, but mosquitoes cause the most human deaths. So you'd be like, mosquitoes, let's wipe them out. If we could take one out, well, if we had a life without mosquitoes, that would cause so much disruption to our sensitive ecosystem food chains, right? Because again, bats, birds, a lot of other insects themselves, they depend on mosquitoes to eat. So, I mean, again, of medical importance, because we have a lot of entomologists working against all of those diseases that they spread because they're such a high insect vector, but unfortunately they are important to food chains, so can't get rid of them. And then just, I guess, another one of insect products with silkworms. You have that example. I have that kind of in that top left section there. Silkworms, the domestic silkworm itself is the lead or the only actual producer of silk fabrics, so for our clothing. Was there going to be a question?
Yeah, Mika, I'm so sorry to interrupt. One of our participants requested that you put it into presenter view just because the screen is a little bit small, I think, on cell phone.
Completely understand. I think let me know if this works, because when I tried to put it in presenter mode, my computer was splitting up.
I think that's probably better.
Is
Thanks so much
this
for
a little
doing that.
helpful?
Yeah.
Thanks for letting me know. No problem. Feel free to interrupt me. I don't know how you all do these talks. If you want to do questions while I talk, I don't mind either. So thank you. Again, let me know if that works though. Okay, so we kind of went over the importance, and now I'll get to the actual nitty-gritty of my talk today, right? The reason I'm here. So the good and the bad. So I have in this ring here on one side, I have our good, our beneficials. And it may not be a beneficial that you're normally thinking of, because I know I titled this and you all helped me with pollinators, right? But there are a separate beneficial sector of predators. There's parasitoids. So there's all these other inner working groups in your garden that very much can help out in these systems. So in this left corner, I have a carabid beetle. So that's like a ground beetle. They have these massive mandibles. So those are their mouth parts. I'm sure you can imagine they eat lots and lots of other bad insects. So that's what I have on my right here, which is a squash bug. So I'm sure perhaps you all, and you can let me know if you found squash bugs. They are very much a nuisance to your gardens if you have ever had any squash plants. So let's go over a couple of them, starting with the good. So our pollinators and our beneficials. And again, let me know if this is too tiny. Hopefully I should only have really like big pictures from here on out. So hopefully it should work out. Okay, so as far as pollinators go, I just want to break it down again really quickly. When we think of pollinators, we normally think of honeybees, right? That are non-native to our area. So it's really funny with this, I guess, honeybee glorification, right? That they are the most important pollinators. They are the number one that we think of, but with their declining numbers, honeybees cannot do it alone anymore. So there are a lot of papers, a lot of publications in the academic world right now that are kind of suggesting that with honeybee decline, the other pollinators such as like beetles and wasps and moths and butterflies, I have a whole other list that I'll show you here right now in a second, but they increase fruit set, meaning that if you have all of those other pollinators pollinating things that honeybees would do at the same time, because honeybees are not as well adjusted to land change and they're more sensitive to environmental conditions, right? All these other insects like the flies and the beetles, they very much pollinate well and almost better in certain circumstances. So definitely want to... Is everything okay? I thought I heard someone, sorry. Definitely want to show them and highlight them on this because we have flies like in this bottom right corner. That's actually a bee mimic. So those are bee mimic flies, and those flies are really incredible because when compared to honeybees, they again have so many hairs on their body, and that's normally what gives honeybees their superpower of being able to carry so much pollen at a time. But that hair on their body, the flies have it just as much, almost more. So they can also carry the same amount of pollen as honeybees, which I think is really cool. And then I have a moth in that type top right corner there. And moths are very much overrated pollinators because they pollinate at night, right? They're nocturnal, so they're grossly underestimated. And because they're nocturnal insects, normally with research and being in an academic sphere, you don't have a lot of researchers going up at night at 3 a.m. to go look at moths. So not only are they underestimated for that, but they're also understudied, unfortunately. But it's really cool because there are facts like, I believe orchids and the yucca plant are only solely pollinated by moths. So they're very important as well. I also have sort of in this top left corner here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse here, that's a soldier beetle. It's really funny because being in an entomologist sphere and working in my lab, it's almost like we had to have a graduate student come on a project to show how prevalent they were. But if you have just like goldenrod in your yard, these things are all over it. And all they do, what our graduate student found out through her research, is they just mate. They just mate and groom each other and they pollinate. But because they were so understudied, without that graduate student's valuable work, they weren't really recognized as pollinators. They were just beetles. But alas, beetles, very comparable to honeybees as pollinators. You also have things like ants, and I'll bring it up again, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes can also pollinate. I mentioned orchids for moths, but I think specifically a bog orchid can only be pollinated by a mosquito. Or not only, I won't say only, but can be pollinated by mosquitoes. So very important to think about with our pollinators. And again, at the end of this, I'm just going to give some tips on how to attract them, right? But I'm just setting up the scene of who we have here. So for other beneficials, just to meet, we have beetles. Beetles, incredible beneficials. So if we have lady beetles, which is kind of in our right section of this slide, we have a coccinellid, so our pink spotted lady beetle at the top, and then we have a lady beetle larva in the middle. They are ferocious predators. They eat so many things. Their primary prey range from like aphids and mites to just other smaller insects and eggs, because again, these guys are very small, but they'll very much take advantage of transversing around the leaves of any plants they're on. And again, a lot of people talk about the larval stage as being predatory, but also the adults can be predatory too. So very, very important against our vegetable crops. Oh, not to mention against aphids, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with, right? And I apologize if you can hear my dog licking lots of water in the background. So thank you for bearing with me. And then we have ground beetles, again, those carabids that I had at the very beginning. I have that in the left corner in the bottom. And then when I mentioned those soldier beetles, if I can go back really quickly, this top guy here, the larval stage is actually a ferocious predator. So not only is it a pollinator, but it's also a predator, which we found through research. So very important. Excuse me. So again, with, I guess, just beetles as a whole, you have to think of them as incredible predators because they're some of the largest and most diverse groups of insects. But not only that, those chewing mouth parts that they're known for, they can chomp on lots of pests for you. So just bringing light to them. And I also have predators in a section of bugs. So bugs as in hemipteran, so bugs as in not beetles, bugs as in, you know, people say lady bugs, but ladybugs are actually lady beetles. Don't mean to confuse you all more, but I guess what sets hemipterans or bugs apart from beetles is that they have these piercing sucking mouth parts. So it looks like they have a straw attached to their mouth. Not so much like a serrated needle like a mosquito, but they essentially have this straw, and what that straw mouth part does and why it makes them such ferocious predators of a lot of pest systems is because they can inject a toxin from their body inside that straw. So imagine like regurgitating in a straw that you're using to like sip up a smoothie, and then they suck up the body fluids that, because that toxin allowed them not only to paralyze their prey, but sometimes liquefy the body parts. So very refined, evolved system that I still find quite interesting, but just overall, I guess what you could take from predators as bugs is that very much generalists. We have stink bugs up here, which I'll mention later because I'm sure we all are familiar with brown marmorated stink bugs, which I'll speak about in a little bit when I talk about pests. But I have some predatory stink bugs up here, podiasis stink bugs. So if you see this kind of like rocket ship kind of looking picture on the back, that's a good guy. As you can see here, they're very much sucking up some Colorado potato beetle larvae. So they're very good to see in agriculture or just garden systems too. So again, their primary prey, small insects, you have to think of like eggs and larvae. And again, they are predatory at both their nymphal, so their young stage, and their adult stage. And for crops, I guess, I mean, almost anything in your garden stink bugs will be found on, which again, I'll mention more on the pest side, but just to get over that, I'll also mention like the minute parrot bug, or pirate bug, excuse me, which is under them. They're very much a key predator of thrips. So if you have like a rose bush in your garden or something like that, you'll probably find thrips. But if you also find this minute parrot bug, pirate bug, excuse me, up here, not parrot, I'm thinking of parrot because of pirate, minute pirate bug, they very much prey on thrips, both their eggs and their larval stage. And then we also have like assassin and damsel bugs here, which are perfect predators. And then we also have like our miscellaneous predators too, right? So we have spiders, which are often overlooked. Again, I'm an entomologist, so technically spiders are not insects, but as a lover of all arthropods, cannot overlook the benefits they give to preying on things in vegetable gardens too. You can see them eating that pest stink bug that I mentioned right here. There's also robber flies. They go so incredibly fast. Like, I think when you break it down to human speed, it's like miles per minute if they were as big as us, of course. But they are ferocious predators. I unfortunately didn't think to put a picture, so forgive me, but if you look it up on your own of a robber fly, they have these massive leg systems, and it looks like a helicopter meets like a claw machine, grabbing machine. So it's just, they are incredible as well. I also have some mantids up here. And then I have a mantid egg sac up here too. Very much true generalists. They overwinter their eggs. And in that one egg sac, there will be hundreds of baby mantids so if you find that weird looking egg sac and you're like, oh, maybe it's like a wasp and I want to get rid of it, or if it scares you or not, I mean, just make sure with the resources that I'm going to give out today and double check possibly with those online resources, because you very well could have a beneficial army in the works of your garden system that you do not want to get rid of. Because again, those praying mantises, fierce predators, they'll hunt other insects. They'll hunt insects that will terrorize your garden, excuse me. So all those annoying bugs that I'll mention in a little bit, very, very good to take care of that too. I also have the green lacewing at the bottom here. That's a fun insect. I have their eggs right here. It almost looks like if you had pieces of hair with like tiny dots on them. They're normally found on like the underside of leaves, but if you see those eggs, keep them in your garden system too, because they'll get rid of a lot of pests like caterpillars and aphids, a lot of soft body insects because of their mouth parts. So they're really great to have in your systems as well. And then again, so I talked about pollinators, I talked about predators now, and then the third kind of in the realm of beneficial insects that I just want to mention as well today are parasitoids. So I just have two brief pictures here, but I have a lot more to share in terms verbally, because when you're thinking of parasitoids, to break down that word, it might sound weird. You can think of wasps. Wasps as parasitic insects, just meaning insects that can lay their eggs inside of other insects. I think that's wild. I remember learning about that as an undergrad. I feel like that was one of the drivers of me ending up where I am today. So some examples, this picture here, if you have tomatoes in your garden, I'm sure you've seen tomato hornworms, those big, goopy, globby, massive green caterpillars in your garden, right? Now, I'm not sure. I'd love to hear too, maybe if you want to put it in the chat, I don't mind if you interrupt me at all. If you've seen tomato hornworms that have been parasitized by these white cocoons. So you'll see all those white kind of, not spherical, but like elongate, oval kind of eggs. That's a brachyid wasp that is actually oviposited. So the adult female has laid her eggs inside the caterpillar, and then what those eggs do is they grow out of the cuticle or the skin system of the caterpillar, and then they'll kind of sap up the nutrients of the caterpillar and take advantage of the host, but kind of like a very smart I guess cold, right? Like if you want to spread your cold, if you're just thinking of like pathology really quickly, you don't want to kill your host right away because it's not going to be able to go hang out with a bunch of other people and spread on that host. So it's kind of the same in terms of taking advantage of what you want from the host in terms of the nutrients of that caterpillar. So those wasp larvae, if you see one, keep it there. And if it's parasitized, keep it there, because that is a perfect system and it will go to all the other caterpillars in your system as well. There's also other wasps like trichogramma wasps. Those are also great predators, or predators as in parasitoids. They'll lay their eggs in a lot of different insect pests, and they'll hatch all at once. So you can have like 200 eggs on one insect that will all hatch at the same time, which I think is incredible. And I mentioned stink bugs, which I'll talk a little bit more again, as I keep saying, when I bring about the pests in a second. But the samurai wasp that I have in this left hand side of this slide, they are actually native to Asia, so stink bugs also native to Asia when I'm talking about what kind of that cattle story of bringing native insects together. When we were going, I guess, in the insect world of having such a epidemic with trying to get rid of brown marmorated stink bugs and nothing was working, as far as like chemical controls and biological controls, someone accidentally introduced this samurai wasp that just so happens to come from the exact same system as brown marmorated stink bugs. And because of that, they've begun to parasitize and prey on their eggs. So now, I'm sure like you probably saw that boom and bust of a lot of brown marmorated stink bug talk like maybe 10 years ago, and now it's been slowly declining. You can kind of thank the samurai wasp for that, and also just general ecology as insects go in decline. But the samurai wasp, Virginia Tech has like a not USDA, a research station in Winchester, Virginia, which I'm sure is not too far from you all too, if you're familiar with that area. And they very much, I've had colleagues work on this samurai wasp. So we are very happy with these wasps again. Great to keep. So now if you're asking, okay, I mentioned all of these beneficials, how in the heck do I keep them in my garden? Like, why are you here? Give me resources, Mika, right? Okay, I will. So with support of just food and shelter, you kind of have to like think you're the bug to attract the bug and or get rid of bugs, right? So if you're like, why would I want to stay in this garden? I mean, like this picture up here, I mean, it looks beautiful, and I'm sure making a garden like that is definitely not accessible to everyone, so it's not what my garden looks like at all. But just in the ideal heaven, or the perfect garden that an insect would like to look in, I just want to break it down in terms of what that would look like, right? So I have also diversity is key, because I just want to think of the shade and shelter that I guess a perfect system of a garden would bring. So I'll start with diversity is key, and then I'll go back to native plants. But just diversity is key in terms of when you're creating your garden, when you're adding to your garden that maybe you already established right now, you have to think like the insect in terms of what kind of flowers, what kind of foliage are they going to want to be drawn to. If it's a hot day, they're going to want a lot of foliage out so they can hide under. They're going to want a lot of surface area. So if you have plants that have lots of shooting out foliage instead of just one stalk or one leaf, that's going to be very attractive to them as well. That's going to provide a lot of surface area to hide, a lot of shelter to hide, a lot of temperature regulation areas to hide. If you're thinking of flowers to plant, you're going to want to think of diversity in shapes and color and sizes. Not all insects come in the same size, of course, just as we humans don't, definitely, right? So if you're thinking of a tiny little like hoverfly or a bee mimic fly that I was mentioning before, and you have this massive like magnolia flower, they're not going to go in that, because in a microscopic system, it would almost be if you were to compare like insects jumping, or not insects, humans, us, jumping into like a muddy puddle or something, right? Or some like sticky substance that would be hard to get out of, because that's what pollen is to insects when you break it down in a microscopic way. So if you have smaller flowers with more accessible pollen, less pollen in terms of density, those pollinators or those beneficials will definitely like those flowers, and just in terms of shapes and different angles for different flies and moths to get in. I mean, of course, if you're thinking about like nighttime pollinators, like how I mentioned those moths, there are a lot of moths and butterflies that have very long mouth parts, or long-tongued pollinators, which is what we like to call them. So if you're thinking of like, again, those massive flowers, they're going to be able to take advantage of those systems because they can create distance between themselves and that flower. But if you have a very lightweight pollinator, something really tiny like those flies, they're going to get glued to that pollen right away. So that is not very accessible. The little fly that comes around your garden is going to say, there's not a flower for me. So just plant a lot of diverse flowers in terms of shapes, colors, sizes, in terms of their foliage and what that looks like, and also in location. So when you are planting your garden, and I guess these are kind of before tactics I'd like to mention, and just be mindful about as I speak to you all, because I know that you probably already have your gardens all established too. But if you are looking in next year and just in terms of location, you can think of attracting pollinators in terms of like the perimeter of your garden, which I'm sure you're aware of. If you have raised beds, maybe you can put them in the corners of those beds, because as long as you have like one or two attracting I guess, flower or floral species next to your vegetable garden or whatever you happen to be growing. If you are growing vegetables, that's definitely going to bring in a lot of beneficials too. Even like a smaller tactic that sometimes I like to say, because sometimes I forget myself, and I even mentioned it before about turning your porch light on to look at the wireworms selfishly, or the click beetles selfishly that I mentioned before. I mean, just reducing light pollution. If you turn that porch light off, you're making it much more suitable and accessible. You're making it a nice shelter and a nice attractive area for those nocturnal and nighttime pollinators. So if you want a lot of moth species to come to your floral bushes, I guess, and you don't see that those floral bushes are becoming pollinated, just make sure maybe the first tactic could be to turn that light off. So something so simple that I would normally forget, which is why I just mentioned it. Again, but I'll go back to the first step too, of just planting native plants. Again, I'm sure I'm like speaking to the choir, right? I'm sure you all know this, but just in terms of, I guess, in being Virginia, and I have a lot of resources too to share on this about online resources and plant societies that maybe some of you are or not aware of. But just in like our hardiness zone, which I believe is like 6 to 8, right? Because I know I'm like 6 down here, but I'm not sure if you guys are the exact one. But just in that range, planting native plants, and not only planting native plants, but planting them early. Again, an early tactic, so may be a little too late, but I also have another idea to mention too. But just, I say planting early because I guess another late tactic that you can combine it with, if you have already started growing like early season plants like brassicas right now, right? If you already have those in your garden, something incredible you can do, which maybe somebody already does. So again, I apologize if this is like old news, but something I'd like to just add is allowing yourself to allow those plants to grow to bolt, right? So going to bolt, like shooting off those flowering systems that you may already harvest that broccoli head, but little do you know, like 2 weeks later, it's going to create all these beautiful flowering systems, not only beautiful flowering systems, but very small flowering systems. So those tiny, tiny flowers are going to be very accessible to a lot of smaller insects that you might not otherwise get, because if you're planting like a lot of floral bushes with big flowers, those might be for your bees and your moths and your butterflies, but for all of those, I guess, unlikely pollinators like your beetles and your flies, they'll definitely like the smaller flowers. So just allowing those plants to go to bolt, or just maybe now later if you already don't have your brassicas, but maybe in the later season of just allowing all of those plants to keep growing out even after harvest, if you have several that you want to keep in your system, highly recommend, because they'll definitely attract a lot of those beneficials as well. And then this sounds a little silly, but I promise I have science to back it up. I say maintain a healthy garden because there's something called the plant stress hypothesis. Again, I don't mean to make myself sound more sciencey than I already am, because being I guess, to be vulnerable, being a first-generation student in graduate school, I don't mean to put on like a big hat and sound smarter, but it is called the plant stress hypothesis. And what that plant stress hypothesis means is that insects are more attracted to unhealthy plants. And isn't that weird? And the way I'll break that down, like, I don't know if you've all have mentioned maybe in the late stage of your garden, and there's publications to back this up, but I guess it's still a hypothesis because it's in the works. It's not something that's been 100% proven, but it's a phenomenon that people have noticed in terms of, maybe you have as well, is that in your late season garden, and I know I see this a lot too, when you're having like those dry, shriveled up plants that maybe you haven't got to composting yet, right? Because I know I do the same thing and I'll leave them a little too late. You might see pests go all over that plant, and you're like, why? It doesn't even look healthy. It's because when those plants are at their peak health, at their peak nutrition, they're also producing a lot of acids, a lot of amino acids and compounds that are in their plant defense toolbox, right? So when they're at the height of their peak season, like in the middle of July, when you have that, I guess, beautiful, I don't know, beautiful tomato and pepper plant, the foliage behind those plants, why you may not be seeing as many insects, is because the nutrition in that foliage, the insects know intuitively, and just because of the signals that the plants are giving out that we may not know microscopically, that those plants do not taste good, although they may have to eat them because it's the only food around. So of course, given you're still going to have plants. But I guess in publication terms and with papers, we have found that the fecundity, or I guess the amount of times insects can reproduce and continue that life stage, right, of creating eggs on your plants in your garden, and then having baby insect pests, and then having adult insect, and then continuing that cycle all over, they do that less on healthier plants. So when plants are under stress, when you may not have as great of a soil as certain years, when you may not have rotated those crops, so you may have different mineral systems in there, those insects can pick up on it. And if they sense any type of weakness per se in your garden, they will hone in on it. So just a simple of keep that garden less stressed as best you can, which I'm sure you all are doing a great job as, but I'm kind of repeating it to myself as I remember when I get a little lazy at the end of a gardening season, because more oftentimes than not, sometimes those insect pests can actually overwinter and then create problems in the next year, which we definitely do not want. So I've spoken about them a lot. Again, the bad, and we'll make this really quick because I'm being mindful of time and I definitely want to have a discussion with you all at the end. But just pest, a quick recap, because I really wanted to, I guess, give the majority of the talk to the good and the attractants, and this really was my idea as a pest insect entomologist of what the bad is. I started my research as an undergrad in brown marmorated stink bugs. So again, those stink bugs, they're not only a pest in your garden in a lot of agricultural systems, like big scale for a lot of farmers out here in Blacksburg, but also in houses. This left picture here, that's inside a house, if you can believe it or not. Definitely probably in an attic of some sort where those stink bugs, like I'm sure you find them in windowsills because they find themselves in cracks and then they aggregate in massive amounts so they can keep themselves warm together. They're quite smart, but also quite annoying too, right? So those stink bugs, I have a picture of a pepper here. They kind of have that classic like sunburnt damage picture. It's because those stink bugs are sucking up the juices. They're hemipterans, again, with that straw mouth part, and they'll suck up the juices, and thereby doing so, they'll change the color and the texture of that plant crop or that produce there. So definitely unsightly. Not only that, I believe they also make them bitter. Stink bugs are a no-go. Now, what I can share is that in terms of, I know I'm speaking to a crowd because I spoke with Thomas that very much values biological control, a little less on the chemical control. So if I can aid in anything of what to do with stink bugs, I hate to say it, but picking them off manually, it does help. And then picking off the bodies and maybe putting in a soapy trap, if you've ever heard of a soapy water trap, very accessible and easy to make. I can speak about it later more in a discussion because I want to get through the rest of the slides, but it's a very easy trap you can make by just filling up a soda bottle or like a reused recycled soda bottle that's been washed out with soapy water and then putting that in your garden. That will actually attract them, believe it or not, which is what we found in my lab. So another nuisance bug, Harlequin bugs. Again, I'm just giving small examples of pests to tell you all perhaps good things that you can do to get rid of them. Again, those brown marmorated stink bugs, highly suggest picking them off and throwing them in a soapy water trap, maybe having a soapy water trap that's very safe and biologically controlled for your garden. With Harlequin bugs, again, these bugs have so much incredible physiological systems that we are just now beginning to understand. But I'm sure if you have brassicas, like cabbage and broccoli and cauliflower, like me, in your garden, you've probably seen these guys before. They have those beautiful egg masses that I must admit, those barrel-shaped like black and white, hence the name Harlequin. And they're very bright and orange, and they very much mate everywhere they go. But again, if you have those brassicas, what we normally recommend to do, and what we've been finding in my lab in the Vegetable Insect Pest Research Lab, is that these guys are heavily attracted to certain crops. So this is coming in with trap cropping, right? If you're not familiar with that term. So if you have your garden and if you just, instead of spraying chemical controls, right, and using your money on that, maybe you have a throwaway plant, like 1 to 5 plants in your garden, maybe at the edges of a garden bed or at the perimeter that you are okay with insects going to, because you understand that if they're going to this one plant, they actually won't as likely bother your other plants being, and the secret is that it's mustard. Mustard crops in the brassicas family, apparently harlequins love them. We have done studies and studies on again, so if you can get your hands on mustard and plop a mustard plant in that brassicas patch of whatever broccoli cabbage plant you have, harlequins love them and will flock to them and leave the other plants alone. So just reiterating trapping crop systems of what that may work. And then what I wanted to end today with is spotted lanternfly, right? Like the newest hot topic of insects and problems. And I know they're already in Winchester, so I'm not sure if you all have had problems with them there, but I know they're as far down as Winchester right now. The newest threat to agriculture, not only that, but also in garden systems as well. People with new seedling saplings, if you have tree of heaven in your area, that is their love, that is their main food that they love. Again, they're hemipterans, so they have that sucking mouth part. They very much take advantage of the nutrients and liquids in plant tissues. And I even have colleagues, if you want funny stories, of just because they're taking in so much liquid of a plant so ferociously, so quickly, so rapidly. And like you can see on this trunk of this tree that is just absolutely filled with spotted lanternflies, they create rain. And I'm sure you can imagine, I know I'm just speaking about waste so much. I'm so sorry, you all, but they create rain, which is essentially their waste that just rains down. You can imagine they're at the top of treetops, and I have researcher friends that are trying to work at the base of the tree trunks and getting rid of them, and they say they get rained on by these lanternflies. So they're definitely something we want to get rid of, not just for our fellow entomologists, if you can empathize with their struggle with that, but just in terms of in your gardens, if you have people in your family or in your inner circle in your community working with orchards, they very much flock to those areas too. So what I would recommend for these, speak to your local extension agent. So speak to Thomas about perhaps chemical controls, but the first plan of action is of course picking them off like we spoke about, and then perhaps peeling these egg cases. They look like if someone splayed like mud on a tree trunk is the best way to kind of describe it. If you were to pick those off, put them in alcohol, sometimes you can squish them. I know that doesn't sound as accessible or fun, but it's very much encouraged to, unfortunately, kill these guys because they will eventually kill our agricultural system. So we want to get ahead of the curve on this, right? And again, just some resources wrap up before we get in a nice conversation, hopefully. I would like to just say that the iNaturalist app is incredible for people in gardens. It's even a website too, so if you're not really comfortable using apps on your phone, that's completely fine. It's a community-based project, so what you normally have is you're able to take pictures on your phone or send pictures in on the internet, and then you can get a positive ID back. So I'm mentioning all these insects, and this is definitely not a test, so I don't expect you to remember them all, but if you still need help IDing and maybe you want something quicker than sending to your extension agent right away, or you might have an idea and you kind of want a confirmation, apps like iNaturalist are actually backed up by publications of how accurate they are. We've had people at Virginia Tech use them. I use them too. So it's community-based. You just take a picture, you can get an ID that way. And then in terms of attracting beneficials, I have plant your native plants, right? So there's a society, the Plant Northern Virginia Native .org, their wonderful website that has a lot of native plants listed specifically for your area, because of course, being in Blacksburg, I'm a part of the Southwestern Virginia Native Plant Society. And then I'm sure you're all familiar with the Prince William Wildflower Society. You of course have your Master Gardener .org website, and then just your Prince William County Extension. Always send in if you really want that positive ID and you're not, or you are okay with waiting. Virginia Tech has their Virginia Cooperative Extension programs. We have lots of flash sheets and quick accessible guides to pests if you want some good ideas. And then again, just some wildflower. So excuse me, I did that second. But then just acknowledgements of my lab and my funding sources. Always good to say thanks and appreciate the people that have put me here today. And then with that, I'd love to take questions. So sorry if I spoke a little too long.
No, that was perfect. Thanks so much, Mika. What an awesome presentation. Enjoy geeking out over any bugs at any time. I thought you might appreciate this. One of the master gardeners.
Yeah.
I know precisely who made it, but yeah, I thought that was cute.
Also, my bad. I should have kept I have my email there if anyone needs it. So.
Anyone have any questions for Mika?
Doesn't even have to be a question. You just tell me fun facts about the bugs in your garden. I just love hearing about them anyway. If you have wireworms, if you have spotted lanternfly, please let me know. I am curious.
There's no questions in the chat box, but if anybody has any, you can unmute and ask, or a question, or tell Mika about the bugs in your garden.
Oh, you found them. Oh, you had a trap already. Amazing.
Looks like someone asked about phlox bug treatment.
Phlox bug. You know, this may be the first time I'm not familiar with phlox bug. I'm so sorry. Phlox bug, like the true bug. This is why entomologists are so annoying. We have so many common names for certain insects. So there might be like 10. If it is a hemipteran, I would say your best bet is that soapy water trap that I mentioned, and I can go more into that of just, if you take a recycled like liter soda bottle or something like that, all you have to do is cut off the top of it, like the rim, the entrance where you would take a swig from it, and then you invert it so it becomes kind of a funnel. And then if you put a soapy water ratio in, it's on our Virginia Cooperative Extension. I can even try and throw it in if I find the web link really quickly, because my lab, my advisor, Dr. Thomas Kuar, actually made that. So if you just put soapy water in and then you have that funnel, they find it very hard to get out. So if you have like a hemipteran problem, which I think that phlox bug probably is, I would definitely recommend that. Where do you find the wasp that attacks the stink bug? The samurai wasp that I mentioned, they are native to Southeast Asia. I'm not sure if they're like available for purchase just yet. I just know that they have been introduced as far as lab research. Excuse me, sorry, that's my dog. So I know that they're around in this system and they're naturally taking care of them.
I had a question comment for you too. We did have one of our Audubon at Home ambassadors talk about leaving stems of kind of last year's plants up in the garden. His advice was about leaving 1/3 or so of the stems up. Is that something that you have seen any research on to support that?
That's an interesting take. Can I, if you can, and I'm not expecting you to like have the full answer, did they mean like compared to doing your entire garden, like as if it would be too many weeds at once to compost?
So his take was just kind of leaving any stems in place. So after kind of the years gone by, and then you have, you know, your plants there, and there's always that question of when you should take them down in the spring versus when you should let them be. So he did some research on it, and his take on it was if you leave 1/3 of those stems, that gives enough room for the rest of the plants to come up and may look a little bit tidier for neighborhood associations or neighbors that may not like the weedy sort of appearance for us, kind of more suburban folks that have to worry about
for the aesthetics. Of course, I mean, I always say take the entire plant and compost, because composting is so great. But I guess in the heart of this presentation, if we're talking about what we can do to attract beneficials, I mean, if we're speaking about those sheltered systems again, all of those old plants, they're definitely providing insects an overwintering area. Now, whether if that's a good insect or a bad is kind of hard to say, because you're definitely going to be helping beneficials out, but you may very well help out some not so pesty species as well if you're providing them an area to live over the winter. So I can give context to that. I'm not sure about the numbers, though. Thank you.
Good answer. Thank you.
Wonderful. You have carabids and the lacewings. Yes, they are ferocious predators.
And I think Adele responded back with that insect that they were concerned about was Lopodea davisi, not one I'm familiar with.
Okay, the phlox bug. Okay, yeah, that's definitely a hemipteran. I would, again, confirm that the soapy water traps are definitely the best. Thank you. That got lost. I apologize, Adele. That's that little red hemipteran, I believe, right? Thank you for the questions. Ooh, fireflies. Attracting fireflies? Ooh, you know, I have to say I don't particularly have like 100% certain area, but I'm sure given that they're like soft-bodied beetles, which are really great, they most definitely would have to pollinate something at some point. So again, just planting native plants. I don't have a specific answer though. I haven't really thought about fireflies. Thank you for that. They're beautiful though. I would want to attract them too.
I think often we tell our clients to save some leaf litter to make sure that they have some larval habitat going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Going in the heart of like at the end of this season, I guess, when you're taking down your garden and if you're thinking about like the 1/3 of your planter, if not, just remembering that if you're taking out a little bit of those plants and composting them or setting them up on the edge or perimeter of your garden and kind of making that sheltered system, and like what you're saying, Valerie, like adding leaf litter, you're definitely creating this microhabitat that's very great for other insects to take advantage of. But I do have to give like the little disclaimer that you may be helping some not fun insects. But often more times than not, I mean, you'll have a lot of pest species be like grubs. So you'll have like, I guess I'm sure you all know those like Japanese beetle grubs that are in your soil. So to combat those, I would just say like rotating your soil, trying your best to till at a small scale as best you can, and just rotating your crops in general will help with those pests. And of course, picking them out manually too, which is what I just do as I garden.
Right. Seeing none, thanks again so much. We really enjoyed your talk. That was great.
Yes, thank you, Nika.
Thank you. You all have been so kind. Thank you all. I wish you incredible luck and prosperity in your gardens.
Thank you. You too.
Mm-hmm.